The stars burned cold above the throne world of Ascendra, and King Thyros Valkith stood alone on the balcony of his ancient palace, watching the sky with eyes that had seen 1,000 wars come and go. He was old by the standards of his people. His once bright silver skin now faded to a pale gray, and the bioluminescent markings that traced his face flickered with less intensity than they had in his youth. Yet his mind remained sharp, and his heart still burned with the fire of a ruler who had never known defeat until now. The war against the Kethra Dominion had dragged on for 7 long cycles. And though the Valorian Empire possessed the finest ships and the most disciplined soldiers in the known galaxy, the Kethra fought with a savagery that defied all logic and reason. They cared nothing for treaties, nothing for honor, nothing for the ancient laws that governed civilized warfare. They simply consumed, spreading across the stars like a plague of locusts, devouring everything in their path. But Thyros had one weapon the Kethra could not match: his daughter, Princess Sira Valkith, commander of the legendary Silver Fleet. She was everything a Valorian ruler should be: brilliant, fearless, beloved by her soldiers, and respected by her enemies. Where Thyros ruled with caution and wisdom, Sira led with passion and fire, and together they had held the Dominion at bay for years. The Silver Fleet was more than just a military force. It was a symbol of hope for the entire empire, and Sira was its shining heart. 3 days ago, Thyros had stood in this very spot and watched the Silver Fleet depart for the Crimson Nebula, where intelligence reports indicated a massive Kethra staging ground. Sira had promised him victory, and he had believed her, because she had never failed him before. Now he stood here again, but everything had changed. The doors behind him opened with a soft hiss, and Lord Vethron, his oldest advisor and closest friend, stepped onto the balcony. Thyros did not turn to look at him, for he already knew what news the old counselor carried. "My king," Vethron said, and his voice trembled in a way Thyros had never heard before. "The scouts have returned from the Crimson Nebula. Tell me," Thyros commanded, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to cover his ears and refused to listen. "The Silver Fleet was ambushed, my king. The Kethra knew we were coming. They had twice the forces our intelligence predicted, perhaps 3 times. Our ships fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed." Thyros gripped the balcony railing so hard that the ancient stone cracked beneath his fingers. "And my daughter?" The silence that followed was the worst sound Thyros had ever heard. Her flagship, the Eternal Dawn, was struck in the opening moments of the battle, Vethron said softly, and it fell into the gravity well of an unstable star. The ship was pulled into uncharted space, a region we have avoided for centuries. "Human space," Thyros whispered, and the words tasted like ash on his tongue. "Yes, my king." The scouts searched for 3 days, but they found only wreckage and debris. There were no survivors, no escape pods, no distress signals, nothing. Thyros closed his eyes, and for a long moment he did not breathe. He thought of Sira as a child, running through the palace gardens with her silver hair streaming behind her. He thought of her as a young woman, standing before the Imperial Academy and accepting her commission with such pride. He thought of her face the last time he saw her, fierce and determined, promising him that she would return. And now she was gone. "Leave me," Thyros said, and his voice was hollow like an empty tomb. "My king, the council awaits. We must discuss our response to this defeat. We must." I said, "Leave me." The words echoed across the balcony like thunder, and Vethron bowed low before retreating into the palace. The doors closed behind him, and Thyros was alone once more. For the first time in his long life, the king of the Valorian Empire wept. The funeral was held 3 days later, though there was no body to burn. Thousands of Valorians filled the great plaza before the palace, their bioluminescent skin casting a soft blue glow in the twilight. They had come to mourn their princes, to honor the woman who had given her life defending them from the Kethra menace. Thyros stood on the ceremonial platform, wearing the black robes of mourning, and he looked out at the sea of grieving faces and felt nothing at all. The fire that had burned in his heart for so many centuries had gone out, leaving only cold emptiness behind. He spoke the ancient words of farewell, the same words his ancestors had spoken for 10,000 generations, but they felt meaningless on his tongue. What good were words when his daughter was gone, lost forever in the cold void of space? The Eternal Dawn's battle standard was lowered into the ceremonial flame, and as it burned, Thyros made a silent vow. He would continue the war. He would fight until his last breath, but he no longer cared whether he won or lost. Victory without Sarah would be hollow, and defeat would simply be an end to his suffering. In the weeks that followed, the war turned against the Valorians. Without the Silver Fleet, without Sarah's brilliant tactics and inspiring leadership, the Empire's forces began to falter. System after system fell to the Kethra advance, and though Thyros sent fleet after fleet to hold the line, nothing could stop the enemy's relentless march. The king became a ghost in his own palace, wandering the empty halls at night and refusing to see anyone. His advisors begged him to take action, to rally the empire, to give his people hope. But Thyros had no hope left to give. He was a broken man, waiting for the end. But far away, in the cold darkness of human space, something was stirring. The wreckage of the Eternal Dawn drifted through an asteroid field, battered and broken but not entirely destroyed. Deep within the ship's shattered hull, emergency systems still flickered with faint life, and a single escape pod remained intact. Inside that pod, Princess Sarah Valkith opened her eyes. Pain flooded through her body. Her left arm was broken. Her ribs were cracked, and a deep gash ran across her forehead. But she was alive, and that was more than she had any right to expect. She tried to move, but agony shot through her limbs and she collapsed back against the pod's interior. The air was thin. The temperature was dropping, and she could hear the distant hum of the pod's failing power core. She was dying slowly but surely, and there was nothing she could do about it. Through the pod's small viewport, she could see only darkness and debris. She had no idea where she was, no way to call for help, no hope of rescue. Her people would never find her here, in this forgotten corner of the galaxy. As her consciousness began to fade, she heard a sound that made no sense, the rumble of an approaching engine, growing louder and closer with each passing moment. Was it the Kethra, come to finish what they had started, or something else entirely? The last thing Sarah saw before darkness claimed her was a strange, angular ship unlike anything in the Valorian fleet. And painted on its hull were symbols she did not recognize, symbols from a species her empire had dismissed as primitive and irrelevant. Human symbols. And then there was nothing but silence and shadow, and the faint hope that perhaps, against all odds, she might survive to see another dawn. Marcus Cole had seen a lot of strange things in his 32 years of life, but the alien woman lying unconscious in the wrecked escape pod was definitely the strangest. He stood at the edge of the debris field, his salvage ship hovering just outside the worst of the floating wreckage, and he stared at the readings on his scanner with disbelief. The pod's life support was failing fast, and whoever was inside had maybe 20 minutes left, maybe less. The smart thing to do would be to turn around and fly back to Outpost Jericho. Humans had no contact with the alien empires that ruled the galaxy, and everyone knew that getting involved with extraterrestrial affairs was a good way to end up dead. But Marcus had never been very good at doing the smart thing. "Damn it," he muttered as he guided his ship closer to the pod. "This is going to get me killed." His vessel, the Rust Bucket, was an ugly thing, all patched metal and jury-rigged systems held together by hope and duct tape. But she was fast when she needed to be, and she had saved his life more times than he could count. Today, he hoped she would save someone else's. He maneuvered alongside the escape pod and extended the ship's docking clamps. The pod was Valorian design. He recognized the elegant curves and the silver hull plating from old intelligence briefings during his military days. The Valorians were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, and they had absolutely no interest in humanity. So what was one of their escape pods doing here? In the middle of nowhere, surrounded by enough wreckage to suggest a battle of massive proportions. Marcus didn't have time to wonder. The clamps locked onto the pod, and he activated the emergency airlock override. The pod's hatch hissed open, and Marcus climbed inside with his medical kit in hand. What he found there made him catch his breath. She was beautiful, not in a human way, but in a way that was completely alien and utterly captivating. Her skin was pale silver, covered with intricate patterns that glowed faintly blue, and her hair was long and white like fresh snow. Her features were sharp and elegant, and even unconscious and wounded, she carried an air of nobility that was impossible to miss. But beauty didn't matter right now, survival did. Marcus knelt beside her and checked her vital signs. He had no idea what normal readings looked like for a Valorian, but the blood pooling beneath her and the shallow rise and fall of her chest told him everything he needed to know. "Hold on," he said as he applied emergency bandages to her wounds. "Just hold on a little longer." He worked quickly, sealing the worst of her injuries and injecting her with a broad-spectrum antibiotic that he hoped would work on alien biology. Then he lifted her carefully in his arms and carried her back to his ship. She was lighter than he expected, and as he laid her on the medical cot in the rust bucket's cramped interior, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Her clothing was not ordinary. The fabric was woven with golden thread in patterns he recognized from historical databases, patterns that belonged to Valorian royalty. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Marcus groaned. He had just rescued an alien princess. Before he could process this information, his ship's proximity alarm began to scream. Marcus lunged for the cockpit and stared at the sensor display in horror. 3. Ships were approaching from the debris field, ships with dark, angular hulls and weapons already charging. He had seen pictures of these vessels in military briefings, and he knew exactly what they were. Kethra hunter drones, automated killing machines designed to track and eliminate survivors. They must have been lurking in the wreckage, waiting for any sign of life, and his rescue operation had triggered their sensors. "Not today," Marcus snarled as he threw himself into the pilot's seat and fired up the engines. The rust bucket roared to life, and Marcus pushed her into a tight spin just as the first plasma bolt screamed past the cockpit. The drones were fast, but his ship was faster, at least in short bursts, and he weaved through the debris field like a madman, using the floating wreckage as cover. A second bolt grazed his hull, and warning lights flashed across his console. His shields were down to 60%. Then 50, then 40. He couldn't take many more hits. But Marcus Cole had been a soldier once, and soldiers didn't run from fights they could win. He spun the ship around and opened fire with his forward cannons. The weapons were old and underpowered compared to alien technology, but they were accurate, and Marcus knew how to use them. His first shot caught the lead drone square in its sensor array, and the machine spiraled out of control into an asteroid. The second drone tried to flank him, but Marcus anticipated the move and blasted it apart with a concentrated burst. The third drone was smarter. It hung back, calculating, waiting for an opening. Marcus didn't give it one. He pushed the rust bucket into a steep dive, using the gravity of a nearby asteroid to slingshot himself behind the drone. Before the machine could react, he unloaded everything he had into its engine core. The drone exploded in a brilliant flash of light, and Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. "That's right," he said to the empty cockpit. "Don't mess with humans. He set a course away from the debris field and activated the ship's autopilot. Then he went back to check on his passenger. The alien woman was still unconscious, but her breathing had steadied and the bleeding had stopped. She would live, at least for now. Marcus pulled up a chair beside the medical cot and sat down heavily. He was exhausted. His hands were shaking from adrenaline, and he had absolutely no idea what he was going to do next. He couldn't take her back to Outpost Jericho if anyone found out he was harboring an alien princess. The authorities would lock him up and throw away the key. But he couldn't just dump her somewhere either, not after fighting to save her life. He was still wrestling with this problem when her eyes opened. They were gold, like liquid sunlight, and they stared at him with confusion and fear. "Where am I?" she asked, and her voice was weak but clear. "Who are you?" "My name is Marcus Cole," he said calmly, "and you're on my ship. I found you in the wreckage and pulled you out before those drones could finish you off." She tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her body, and she fell back with a gasp. "Easy," Marcus said. "You're hurt pretty bad. Just rest for now." She stared at him with those golden eyes, and he could see her mind working, processing, trying to understand. "You are human," she said finally, and there was surprise in her voice. "Last time I checked, but humans are." She stopped herself, but Marcus knew what she had been about to say. "Primitive," he finished for her with a grim smile. "Yeah, I've heard that before. I did not mean to offend you," she said, and something like embarrassment flickered across her face. "Don't worry about it. Your people aren't the first to underestimate us, and you won't be the last." She was quiet for a moment, studying him with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. "Why did you save me?" she asked. "You had no reason to risk your life for a stranger." Marcus shrugged. "You needed help. I was there. It's not complicated. But the drones, you could have been killed. But I wasn't." She seemed genuinely confused by his answer, as if the concept of helping someone without expectation of reward was entirely foreign to her. "I am Sarah Valkith," she said finally, "daughter of King Thyros Valkith, ruler of the Valorian Empire. I figured out the prince's part from your fancy clothes." Marcus said dryly, "Then you know that rescuing me has put you in great danger. The Kethra will not stop hunting me, and now they will hunt you as well." Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at her with steady eyes. "Let them come," he said, and there was no fear in his voice. Sarah stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "You truly do not fear them. Fear doesn't change anything. They're coming whether I'm scared or not, so I might as well face them with my head up." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah did something that surprised them both. She smiled. "You are strange, Marcus Cole. I've been called worse." Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and distant, and somewhere in that vast darkness, the enemy was already hunting them. But in that small moment, on that battered ship, something had begun, something neither of them fully understood, and it would change everything. The journey to Valorian space would take 12 days through the most dangerous region of the galaxy, where pirates hunted freely and the Kethra patrol searched for stragglers to capture and kill. Marcus had plotted a course through the backwater systems, avoiding the main travel lanes where they would surely be detected. It meant longer travel time and more fuel consumption, but it also meant a better chance of survival. Sarah had recovered enough to move around the ship, though her arm was still in a sling and her ribs ached with every breath. She spent most of her time watching Marcus, studying him like a scientist examining a fascinating new specimen. He was unlike anyone she had ever met. Valorian officers were formal and precise, trained from childhood to follow protocols and maintain proper distance. Marcus was the opposite. He swore when things went wrong, sang off-key songs while cooking terrible food, and treated her with the same casual friendliness he might show an old comrade. "Don't you have any proper rations?" Sierra asked on the third day, staring at the gray paste Marcus had placed before her. "This is proper rations," he replied with a grin. "Military surplus guaranteed to keep you alive. If not happy, it looks like engine grease. Tastes like it too, but it's got all the nutrients you need. Eat up, princess." She made a face but ate anyway, because her body needed fuel to heal. "Why do you call me that?" she asked between bites. "Call you what, princess?" "You say it like a joke." Marcus shrugged as he sat across from her with his own bowl of gray paste. "Where I come from, we don't have royalty. The idea of someone being special just because of who their parents are seems kind of strange to me. My people have been ruled by the Valkith bloodline for 10,000 cycles. And how's that working out for you?" Sierra opened her mouth to defend her family's honor, but the words died in her throat. Her empire was losing a war, her fleet had been destroyed, and she was stranded in the middle of nowhere with a human salvage operator. "I thought so," Marcus said without mockery. On the fifth day, they ran into their first real trouble. A pirate frigate dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path, its weapons already locked onto the rust bucket. The pirates demanded they surrender their cargo and prepare to be boarded. "What cargo do we have?" Sierra asked, her voice tight with tension. "None," Marcus replied as he studied the enemy ship on his sensors. "But they don't know that. They probably think we're hauling salvage from that debris field. Can we outrun them? No. That frigate is twice our size and 3 times as fast. Then what do? Marcus smiled a sharp, dangerous smile that made Sierra's breath catch in her throat. "We make them regret choosing us as a target." What happened next was something Sierra would never forget as long as she lived. Marcus didn't run. Instead, he flew directly toward the pirate ship at full speed, ignoring their warnings and their threats. The pirates hesitated, confused by this suicidal tactic, and that hesitation cost them dearly. At the last possible moment, Marcus cut the engines and fired his maneuvering thrusters, sending the rust bucket into a spinning roll that carried them beneath the frigate's hull. While the pirates scrambled to reposition their weapons, Marcus unleashed a barrage of fire directly into their exposed engine exhaust ports. The frigate's engines exploded, crippling the ship and leaving it drifting helplessly in space. Marcus didn't stay to gloat. He pushed the rust bucket to maximum speed and was gone before the pirates knew what had happened. "That was insane," Sierra gasped when she finally remembered to breathe. "That was tactics," Marcus corrected her. "They expected us to act like prey, so I acted like a predator. When you can't win on their terms, change the terms. Your military teaches this. My military teaches that there's no such thing as a fair fight. You use every advantage you have, and if you don't have any advantages, you make some." Sierra thought about the battle she had fought, the formation she had used, the protocol she had followed. Everything in Valorian warfare was about honor and tradition, about meeting your enemy face to face in proper combat. Humans apparently had no such restrictions. "Your people are terrifying," she said quietly. Marcus laughed. "You should see us when we're actually trying." On the 8th day, the ship's main power coupling failed. Marcus crawled into the engineering section with a toolkit and a flashlight, and Sierra followed him despite his protests. She wanted to see how he would handle a problem he couldn't shoot his way out of. What she witnessed was nothing short of miraculous. The coupling was completely burned out, and there were no spare parts on board. Any Valorian engineer would have declared the situation hopeless and waited for rescue. Marcus didn't even consider that option. He tore components from 3 different systems: the secondary life support, the backup navigation computer, and the emergency beacon, and somehow combined them into a jury-rigged coupling that was held together with wire, tape, and what appeared to be a piece of his own belt. "That will never work," Sierra said as she watched him jam the contraption into place. Watch and learn, Princess. He activated the power grid, and the ship hummed back to life. How? Sarah demanded. How is that possible? Those parts are not compatible. They were not designed to work together. Nothing is designed to work together until someone makes it work. That's the difference between your people and mine. You see limits. We see challenges. Sarah stared at him, and something shifted in her understanding of humanity. They were not primitive, not at all. They were simply operating by completely different rules. Rules that might be exactly what the galaxy needed. On the 10th day, Sarah finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the moment she woke up on his ship. Why are you helping me, Marcus? The truth, this time. They were sitting in the cockpit, watching the stars streak past as the ship traveled through hyperspace. Marcus was quiet for a long moment before he answered. My mother died when I was 12, he said finally. There was an accident at the factory where she worked, and she was trapped under fallen machinery. The company said it would cost too much to send a rescue team, so they just let her die. Sarah felt her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. I'm sorry. After that, I swore that if I ever had the chance to save someone, I would take it no matter the cost, no matter the risk. When I found you in that wreckage, I didn't see an alien princess or a political complication. I saw a person who needed help, and that was enough. That's always enough. Sarah reached out and took his hand, the first time she had voluntarily touched him since they met. His skin was warm, so different from the cool temperature of her own, and she could feel his pulse beating steady and strong. Thank you, Marcus Cole. He squeezed her hand gently. You can thank me when we get you home. On the 12th day, they reached the border of Valorian space and found Commander Vreth waiting for them. The Kethra hunter had tracked them across half the galaxy, following traces of their hyperspace wake and intercepting patrol reports. Now his massive warship blocked their path, its weapons fully charged and ready to fire. Princess Sarah Valketh, Vreth's voice crackled over the communication channel. Your father misses you. Surrender now, and I promise your death will be quick. Resist, and I will make you watch as I tear your pet human apart piece by piece. Marcus looked at Sarah with calm eyes. Get to the escape pod, he said. What are you going to do? Buy you time. If you can get close enough to the border, your people's sensors will pick you up. Marcus. No, you'll be killed. Maybe, he admitted, but you'll live. And that's what matters. He began to rise from his seat. But Sarah grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. I am not leaving you, she said fiercely. We fight together, or we die together. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and then he smiled. All right, princess. Together it is. Outside, Vreth's warship began its approach, and the final battle of their long journey was about to begin. Commander Vreth's warship was called the Silence, and it had earned that name by killing over 300 Valorian vessels during the war. Now it hung before the rust bucket like a giant beast waiting to devour helpless prey. But Marcus Cole had never been helpless in his life. I'm going to need you to trust me, he said, as he pulled up the ship's systems on his console. I already trust you, Sarah replied. Good, because what I'm about to do is going to seem completely insane. He activated the ship's communication array and broadcast on all frequencies, not just the Vreth ship, but to every sensor and receiver within range. This is Marcus Cole of the human vessel Rust Bucket, and I am escorting Princess Sarah Valkith of the Valorian Empire back to her people. Any Valorian ships in range, respond immediately. Your princess is alive and she needs help. Vreth's voice came through the speakers, cold and amused. Clever, human, but pointless. There are no Valorian patrols within range of your signal. You are alone, and you are dead. The Silence opened fire. Marcus threw the ship into a desperate evasive maneuver, rolling and diving as plasma bolts screamed past the cockpit. The rust bucket shook and groaned under the strain, but she held together barely. "We cannot survive a direct engagement," Sira shouted over the noise of alarms. "I know. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to stall." "Stall for what?" "For help to arrive." Another bolt struck their shields, and the lights flickered across the console. Their defenses were failing, and Marcus knew they only had minutes before Vreth's weapons tore them apart. But he had one more trick to play. "Hold on to something," he warned Sarah. He cut the main engines completely and activated the emergency thruster system, not to accelerate forward, but to reverse. The rust bucket shot backward directly toward the silence. Vreth didn't expect this suicidal maneuver. His weapons were calibrated for a target moving away, not toward, and his first shots went wide. Marcus used those precious seconds to dive beneath the silence's hull, just as he had done with the pirate frigate. But this time, he wasn't aiming for the engines. "What are you doing?" Sira demanded. "Their shields are weakest along the ventral sensor array. If I can hit it, they'll be blind for at least 30 seconds. And then what? And then we run like hell and hope your people heard my message." He lined up his shot and fired everything. The rust bucket headed directly into the silence's sensor array. The explosion lit up the void, and Vreth's ship went dark as its targeting systems crashed. Marcus pushed the engines to maximum and raced toward the Valorian border. Behind them, the silence recovered faster than Marcus had hoped. Vreth was good, maybe the best pilot Marcus had ever faced, and his crew had the damaged sensors back online within 20 seconds. The warship gave chase, its superior speed closing the distance with terrifying efficiency. "They're gaining," Sira said, her voice tight. "I know, Marcus. We're not going to make it. We're going to make it." A plasma bolt struck their aft shields and blew them out completely. The next hit would tear through their hull. Vreth's voice echoed through the speakers once more. "A valiant effort, human, but this ends now. Surrender the princess, and I will grant you a warrior's death." Marcus reached for the communication controls, but before he could respond, Sira put her hand on his arm. "Let me." She activated the channel and spoke with the full authority of her royal bloodline. "Commander Vreth, this is Princess Sarah Valkith. I will never surrender to you or your people. If you want me, you will have to kill me, and I promise you, my death will cost you more than you can imagine." Vreth laughed. "Bold words, princess, but empty. Your empire is falling, your father is broken, and your people have lost hope. What can you possibly threaten me with?" Sarah smiled. This. From out of hyperspace, 3 Valorian warships emerged directly between the rust bucket and the silence. They were patrol vessels, smaller than Vreth's flagship, but together they represented enough firepower to make even the infamous Hunter think twice. The lead ship hailed them immediately. "This is Captain Velrath of the Imperial Patrol. We received your distress signal, and we are here to escort Princess Sarah Valkith home." Vreth hesitated. Marcus could almost feel the calculations running through the Hunter's mind. 3 ships were not enough to destroy the silence, but they were enough to delay him, and every moment of delay gave the Valorians time to summon reinforcements. "This is not over, Princess," Vreth snarled. "I will find you again, and next time. I will find you again, and next time. There will be no rescue." The silence turned and jumped to hyperspace, leaving nothing but empty void behind. Marcus collapsed back in his seat and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 12 days. "We made it," he said. "We made it," Sira agreed, and there were tears in her golden eyes. The throne world of Ascender was everything Marcus had imagined, and more a planet of crystal spires and floating cities, where bioluminescent gardens bloomed beneath alien moons, and the palace of the Valkith dynasty rose from the center of the capital like a monument to eternal power. The rust bucket landed in the royal docking bay, surrounded by guards in gleaming armor and courtiers in elaborate robes. Marcus had never felt more out of place in his entire life. "Maybe I should stay on the ship," he suggested. "Absolutely not," Sarah said firmly. "You saved my life. You will be honored for it." "I don't need honor. I just need a full tank of fuel and a clear path back to human space." Sarah looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Is that truly all you want?" Before Marcus could answer, the doors of the docking bay opened, and King Thyros Valketh himself strode through. He was tall and ancient, his silver skin faded with age, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made Marcus instinctively straighten his posture. This was a being who had ruled an empire for longer than human civilization had existed. "Father," Sarah called out, and suddenly she was no longer a princess. She was just a daughter who had finally come home. She ran to him, and Thyros caught her in his arms and held her like he would never let go. Marcus watched them embrace, and he felt something twist in his chest. Not sadness, exactly, but an awareness of how alone he truly was. When Thyros finally released his daughter, his eyes fell upon Marcus. "Who is this?" The question was not hostile, but it was not friendly either. It was the voice of a king demanding answers. "This is Marcus Cole, father," Sarah said. "He saved my life." Thyros studied Marcus with those ancient burning eyes. "A human." "Yes, father." The court erupted in whispers, shocked, outraged, scandalized. Marcus could see the disgust on many of the nobles' faces, the way they looked at him like he was some kind of insect that had crawled into their pristine halls. "Your Majesty," one of the advisors stepped forward, "I must protest. This human cannot be allowed to remain in the palace. His presence here is an insult to our traditions and a threat to our security." Other voices joined in, calling for Marcus to be arrested, imprisoned, executed. The guards began to move toward him, and Marcus tensed, preparing for a fight he knew he could not win. Then Sarah did something that shocked everyone into silence. She stepped between Marcus and the guards, her broken arm still in its sling, her body battered but her spine straight and proud. "If any of you touch this man, you answer to me." "Princess, you forget yourself," the advisor sputtered. "I forget nothing. I remember every moment of the 12 days it took to reach home, 12 days in which this human fought for me, bled for me, and risked his life to save mine. Where were you during those 12 days, Lord Vethran? Where were any of you?" The court fell silent. "He could have abandoned me," Sarah continued. "He could have left me to die in the wreckage or handed me over to the Kethra. Instead, he fought an enemy he had never met to protect a princess of a people who call his species primitive and worthless. Tell me, where is the insult in that?" Thyros watched his daughter defend the human with fire in her eyes. And for the first time since receiving news of her death, something stirred in his heart. "Daughter," he said softly, "what would you have me do?" Sarah turned to face her father, and her voice was steady. "Treat him with the honor he deserves. Learn from him, as I have learned. Humans are not what we believe them to be." The king stepped forward until he stood directly before Marcus. They were the same height, the ancient alien monarch and the young human soldier, and they stared at each other across a gulf of species and culture and power. "What manner of creature are you, Marcus Cole?" Thyros asked, "that you would risk everything for a stranger?" Marcus met the king's gaze without flinching. "I'm just a human, Your Majesty, and humans take care of their own. But my daughter is not one of your own." Marcus smiled slightly. "She is now." The king was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his ancient face, the first smile he had worn in longer than anyone could remember. "Perhaps," Thyros said, "we have much to learn from you after all." Marcus woke in a bed softer than anything he had ever felt in his life, surrounded by walls of polished crystal that reflected the light of 3 distant moons. For a moment, he had no idea where he was. Then the memories came flooding back, the battle, the escape, The throne room. The king's strange smile, and he sat up with a groan. His body ached from a dozen different wounds, and his head throbbed with exhaustion. But he was alive. That counted for something. A door opened, and Syrah stepped into the room. She was no longer wearing the tattered clothes from their journey, but instead a flowing gown of silver and gold that marked her as royalty. Her wounds had been treated with Valorian medicine, and though she still moved carefully, she looked stronger than she had in days. "You're awake," she said with a smile. "How long was I out?" 2 days. "Our physicians healed your injuries, but they said your body needed rest." Marcus swung his legs over the side of the bed and tested his weight. Everything seemed to be working properly. "I should go," he said. "My ship must be refueled by now, and I don't want to cause any more trouble for you." "Go where?" "Back to human space. Back to my life." Syrah crossed the room and stood before him, her golden eyes searching his face. "Is that what you want?" Marcus opened his mouth to say yes, but the word wouldn't come. The truth was, he didn't know what he wanted anymore. His old life seemed so far away, so small compared to everything he had experienced in the past 2 weeks. Before he could answer, a servant appeared at the door and announced that the king wished to see Marcus in his private chambers. "Here we go," Marcus muttered. The king's private chambers were nothing like the grand throne room. They were warm and intimate, filled with ancient artifacts and personal treasures collected over centuries of rule. King Thyros sat by a window overlooking the capital city, and he gestured for Marcus to join him. "Please sit," Marcus sat. "I have spent the past 2 days learning about your species," Thyros said. "Our records are sparse. We avoided your region of space because we considered you too primitive to be worth our attention. But what I have learned is fascinating." "Fascinating how?" "Your people have existed for barely a fraction of the time mine have ruled this empire. Yet you have spread across dozens of star systems. You have no unified government, no ancient traditions, no genetic superiority, and yet you survive. More than survive, you thrive." How Marcus thought about the question for a moment before answering. "We adapt. It's what we do. When something doesn't work, we try something else. When we hit a wall, we find a way around it or through it. We don't accept limits just because someone tells us they exist. And you do this because it is your nature. We do this because we have to. Humans have never had it easy. We weren't born with superior technology or psychic abilities or any of the advantages other species have. Everything we have, we built ourselves, one piece at a time." Thyros nodded slowly. "My daughter told me about your journey, about how you fought pirates and hunters and mechanical failure with nothing but courage and ingenuity. She said you never gave up, not once, even when surrender would have been the logical choice. Surrender isn't in my vocabulary, so I have gathered." The king stood and walked to the window, looking out at his empire. "The war is going badly. Without the Silver Fleet, without my daughter's leadership, we have lost system after system to the Kethra. My advisors tell me we have perhaps 6 months before they reach this very world. Then you need to change your tactics." Thyros turned to look at Marcus with surprise. "You have suggestions. Your people fight with honor and tradition. The Kethra don't. As long as you play by the rules and they don't, they'll always have the advantage. What would you have us do? Abandon everything our civilization stands for? I'd have you survive. Honor doesn't mean anything if your entire species is dead." The words were blunt, perhaps too blunt to speak to a king, but Thyros didn't seem offended. Instead, he looked thoughtful. "And your people, would they be willing to help us?" Marcus blinked. "You're asking if humanity would fight alongside the Valorian Empire. I am asking if it is possible. I'm just a salvage operator. I don't speak for my entire species." "No," Thyros agreed, "but you could speak to them. You could tell them about the Kethra threat, about what will happen if the Dominion is allowed to continue its expansion unchecked. Your people may have been ignored by the galactic powers, but the Kethra will not ignore you. Eventually, they will come for human space as well. Marcus hadn't considered that. He had been so focused on getting Sarah home that he hadn't thought about the larger picture, about what the fall of the Valorian Empire would mean for humanity. "What are you proposing?" "An alliance," Thyros said, "between my empire and your people. We have technology and resources. You have something we lack, the ability to adapt, to improvise, to fight without being bound by tradition. Together, we might have a chance against the Dominion. That's a big ask. It is. But I believe it is our only hope." Before Marcus could respond, alarms began to blare throughout the palace. Sira burst into the room, her face pale. "Father, the Kethra, they're here." Thyros' expression hardened. "How many ships?" "Their entire fleet. Vreth is leading them personally. They've come to end the war." The king moved toward the door, but Marcus stopped him. "Your Majesty, let me contact human space. I can have ships here within hours. Hours we do not have. Then buy me the time. Fight them the way I fought to get your daughter home. Forget honor, forget tradition. Just survive long enough for help to arrive." Thyros stared at Marcus for a long moment. Then he clasped the human shoulder with surprising strength. "Make the call, Marcus Cole. Show me what humanity can do." The Battle of Ascendra would become the most famous engagement in galactic history. The Valorian fleet, outnumbered 5-1, abandoned their traditional formations and fought with desperate fury. They used asteroids as cover, turned their cargo ships into ramming weapons, and sacrificed cruisers to shield their more valuable vessels. For 3 hours, they held the line. And then, just when it seemed the Kethra would break through, the sky filled with new ships, ugly, angular, patched-together vessels that looked like they had been built from scrap metal and stubbornness. Human ships. They came in waves, dozens of them, hundreds of them. Every vessel that could fly answering Marcus Cole's desperate call for aid. They were small and underpowered and wildly outclassed by the Kethra warships, and they didn't care. They swarmed the enemy fleet like angry insects, attacking from impossible angles and using tactics that no military academy had ever taught. They rammed enemy ships when their weapons failed. They boarded vessels and fought hand-to-hand. They turned every advantage the Kethra had against them. Commander Vreth, watching his carefully planned assault collapse into chaos, screamed orders that his commanders couldn't follow. The humans fought without logic, without pattern, without any of the predictable behaviors his strategies depended on. They fought like creatures with nothing to lose and everything to gain. By the time Vreth's flagship fell to a combined assault of human and Valorian vessels, the Kethra fleet was in full retreat. The Dominion's war machine had been broken, and though the fighting would continue for months, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The war was over. 1 year later, Marcus Cole stood on the same balcony where King Thyros had once mourned his daughter, watching the celebration in the streets below. Humanity had been granted full membership in the Galactic Council, and human ships now patrolled alongside Valorian vessels throughout the Empire. Sira joined him, her silver hair catching the light of the alien moons. "You could go home now," she said. "There's nothing stopping you. I know. But you're not going to, are you?" Marcus smiled. "Someone has to keep you out of trouble, Princess." Sira laughed, a sound like bells ringing, and took his hand in hers. "I suppose someone does." In the shadows of the balcony doorway, King Thyros watched them together, and his ancient heart felt something it had not felt in a very long time. He had mourned his daughter as lost. She had returned with a human, but she had returned with something far greater than that. She had returned with hope for the Empire, hope for the galaxy, and hope for a future where two species that had once ignored each other would stand together against the darkness. The stars burned bright above Ascendra, and for the first time in living memory, They did not seem so cold. The human had been right all along. Surrender was never the answer. You survived. You adapted. You fought. And when the dawn came, you faced it together.